Okay, I think we should start already. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. I like to first welcome everybody and for attending today's panel. I also want to start by thanking Dr. Jonas Adeto of the IPSS for hosting this conference. I like to thank him as well as the staff of the IPSS. I think you would agree with me that they did a wonderful job yesterday. There wasn't any glitches on their part. So, and I'm sure they will do a very good job today as well. Now, I also like to thank the presenters. And in case there are people attending today who were not present yesterday, I like to introduce the Greater Horn Horizon Forum. It is a forum of scholars from the 8 Greater Horn countries and their diaspora as well. And basically the Greater Horn Horizon Forum was established in 2007 with assistance from UNESCO. And over the years, it has received some assistance from different funding agencies. Its main mission really is to do research on pressing issues facing the Greater Horn Horizon, the Greater Horn countries. It is also based on its research, conferences, and workshops. It wants to be a catalyst for peace in the region, socioeconomic development, as well as integration of the region. Those are really the most important aspects of its mission. Membership is open. I'm glad to report that yesterday we had about 6 people who requested registration forms. And we will put on where you send emails to request membership forms. We encourage you to join us. Moving on to the panel, yesterday we had a panel on conflicts surrounding transitions and elections. It was essentially intrastate conflicts. It was dealing with issues of democratization or lack of democratization, transitions, lack of transitions, state-society relations, states' relations with ethnic identities, and so on. It dealt with those types of conflicts. Today's panel would be interstate conflicts, conflicts between states of the region, essentially. And I will call upon Dr. Radi Barakatab to introduce the panel as well as the panelists. Radi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kidane. Well, good afternoon to those who are in the afternoon time zone, and good morning to those who are in the morning time zone. And welcome to the second day, second panel on conflicts surrounding transboundary resources and border disputes. We have 3 speakers. I don't think Dr. Belate has joined us. And there are some requests for change in the order of speaking. I'm not going to try to present every speaker. Simply in the list we have Muhammad Saleh, Professor Muhammad Saleh, speaking on porous borders, peoples, and state in the Horn of Africa. Then we have Damak A, Achiso, transboundary rivers of Ethiopia, a complex mix of the paradox of plenty and blessing. And our third speaker is Tamasgan Tasomariam Bayan, a peace broker on barrier in the Eritrean and Ethiopian border conflicts 1998-2018. Dr. Tamasgan has asked to be the first because he said he might have technical problems after 5 o'clock. So if Professor Muhammad Saleh is okay with the arrangement, we will bring Dr. Tamasgan as the first speaker. I would also like to suggest probably Professor Muhammad Saleh, since he's talking on general the border issues in the Horn, if we can put him as the last speaker. I don't know if Professor Muhammad Saleh would agree with me.
I have no problem.
Okay, then thank you, Professor Muhammad Saleh. And nice to see you, even though virtually. And then instead of Dr. Damake Achiso, we have Dr. Frehiwet Santayohu, who is going to speak instead of Dr. Damake. So without any ado delay, let me ask Dr. Tamasgan to give us his presentation.
Is he in? I didn't see his name.
Well, he wrote in the chat, just asking if he can be the first to speak.
Okay.
Yeah. Dr. Tamasgan, are you with us? Okay. It seems Dr. Tamasgan is having some problem connecting. Well, in the meantime, since we have only 3 speakers, I think every speaker will be allowed between 15 and 20 minutes. That means if every speaker takes 20 minutes, then 1 hour for the speakers and 1.5 hours for discussion. And that I think is enough time for the discussion, as well as the presenters should not be present. They will have time to complete their what they want to say. Dr. Tamasgan, well, I don't know if we should invite Dr. Frehiwet, because Dr. Tamasgan seems has a problem connecting. So instead of wasting time, I think Dr. Frehiwet, you can start
Okay.
And they have 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay. Can I share my screen?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Okay, then great. Okay. Good morning and good afternoon. So I'll be presenting on behalf of my colleague, Dr. Dammega Ajiso, and the title of his paper is Transboundary Rivers of Ethiopia. A complex mix of the paradox of plenty and blessings. So basically this presentation starts with a background, followed by some theoretical discussions, and then it proceeds to the findings, and it basically at last concludes. So to start with the background, the resource curse, also known as the paradox of plenty, refers to the failure of many resource-rich countries to benefit fully from their natural resources, and for governments in these countries to respond effectively to public welfare needs. And the term resource curse encompasses significant social, economic, and political challenges that are unique to countries rich in oil, gas, and minerals. And what's different for this particular study is trying to apply this theory to river basins in Ethiopia, because it's not very usual to use this theory in river basins, and it's instead used in regarding oil, gas, and minerals. So countries highly endowed with bounty of natural resources have tended to fail to benefit from them, and sometimes have performed worse than less endowed countries. And this has also been established in different research that you can see on the screen. And since Sachs and Warner's famous paper in 1995, an extensive literature, both theoretical and empirical, has emerged on this particular theory, basically the resource curse. One recurring example is given by Nigeria's poor performance, albeit its huge oil wells, while diamond-rich Botswana has managed to fall between the cracks. So such instances are particularly raised as a justification, or are the basis of the theoretical discussion, the resource curse. The great heterogeneity of development paths followed among resource-rich countries has shown that the resource curse was not always inevitable, and that there existed ways to make the most of one's natural wealth, because it's not always that resource-rich countries go into conflicts or misuse their resources. So it's not really applicable everywhere. So going to the theoretical discussion, why the resource curse, or the causes of the resource curse? Political scientists and economists argue that oil, mineral, and gas wells is distinct from other types of wells because of its large upfront costs, specific nature, scale, and sometimes referred to as large rents, price and production volatility, non-renewable nature, and the scarcity of the industry. And below are some of the leading observations and theories about how these special characteristics of natural resources create additional challenge for countries. So the first justification is democracy. Natural resource wells, particularly oil wells, has made it more likely for governments to become or remain authoritarian over the past 30 years. So basically countries with or endowed with these natural resources such as oil stayed authoritarian, because governments are not really willing to give up these resources easily, or to hand over to other governments. The second justification, the second cause is conflict. So when governments are not authoritarian, or even if when they remain authoritarian, natural resources can and often do provoke and sustain internal conflicts, as different groups fight for control of the resource or use natural resources to finance their fighting. The third one is inefficient spending and borrowing. And this is basically about the amount that governments collect in resource revenues can change drastically from year to year because of the change in commodities price and production. As resource scarce theories are based more or less on non-renewable resources, none of these theories are applicable in the case of transboundary water resources of Ethiopia, because basically these transboundary water resources are renewable in nature, but the author gives justification why the resource scarce theory is in fact applied in the case of Ethiopia a bit later. Dutch thesis, a large increase in natural resources revenue can hurt other sectors of the economy, particularly export-based manufacturing, by causing inflation or exchange rates appreciation and shifting labor and capital from the non-resource sector to the resource sector. Patriarchy and gender-based challenge, natural resource wealth seems to disproportionately impact women. Recent research indicate that oil-rich countries tend to have fewer women in the workforce and a smaller representation of women in government. Limited government capture of benefits. In some cases, only a small share of the production value of the resource stays in the country. Weaker institutional development. Some research argue that institutions are weaker in resource-rich countries because it's easy for elites to capture or take large sums of cash. Social and environmental problems. The point source nature of extractive industries often creates a challenge when trying to balance the needs of the people, environment, and that surrounds the mining area. So these are the scarce aspects of natural resources being presented theoretically. But Dr. Dammeka tried to apply this particular theory to the case of Ethiopia, particularly in reference to its river basins. So he poses the question, are these river basins in Ethiopia resource scarce, or are they really blessings? And he basically argues that there are both aspects to these river basins being present in Ethiopia. So to start with the blessings, Ethiopia is endowed with a plentiful amount of water resource potential. The country has 12 river basins, 8 river basins, namely Abai, Awash, Baro Akobo, Ganale, Dawa, Merab, Omo, Gibe, Takaze, Wabi Shabelle, have water flow. One of them is a lake basin called Rift Valley, and the remaining are dry basins, which include Aisha, Danakil, Ogaden, with no or insignificant flow out of the drainage system. And continuing with the blessings, the country has also 12 major lakes, which have enough potential to use for different purposes. And in addition, there is sufficient amount of underground water resources. Due to this reason and the extraordinary precipitation volumes that land on its northern, central, and southern highlands, Ethiopia is known as Africa's water tower and is by itself a big blessing by itself. Similarly, with ample water resources, international rivers of Ethiopia constitute 20% of the total technically feasible potential in Africa. With this potential, Ethiopia is usually referred as the powerhouse of Africa. Again, this is a very significant blessing. Out of 11 major river basins found in Ethiopia, of which most are transboundary, 8 of them are identified for their hydroelectric power production potentials. And in those 8 river basins, around 300 hydropower plant sites with a total technical power potential of 159,300 gigawatt hour per year have been identified. Out of these potential sites, 102 are large scale, basically with potential to produce 60 megawatts of electricity, hydroelectric power, and the rest are small scale, less than 40 megawatts, with the potential to produce less than 40 megawatts. This is a resource blessing, at least in the foreseeable future, even if this has not been realized yet. The Ethiopian highlands, northwestern and southeastern highland areas are the origin of many North African rivers and rivers, that is Abai, also called Blue Nile River, Atbara River, Awash, Shabelle, and Omo Turkana, Ganali Dawa. As these rivers are source of blessings to our neighbors too, he says, I could argue that Ethiopia's international rivers are source of blessings, not only to Ethiopia, but also to Ethiopia's neighbors. Then the other case that Dr. Damek raises is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is one of the mega projects and built to achieve the objectives of National Electrification Program and climate resilient green energy strategies, because producing energy from water, fresh water resources in its nature, source of green energy, because there is no CO2 emission in the process. Ethiopia has begun building the Grand Hydropower Dam in 2011 on the Blue Nile River, and the biggest Africa's infrastructure now is at the verge of its completion. And it will be a blessing not only for the nation, but also for the entire basin states and beyond when complete. In 2018, the bulk of Ethiopia's 4.5 gigawatts of power generating capacity came from 14 hydropower plants, which account about 85%, which is 3.8 gigawatt of the country's total capacity, making it the main energy source. And this is a big resource blessing for the nation. Furthermore, as the part of the climate resilient green energy strategy, the Ethiopian government is planning to expand its hydroelectric capacity further and to become a regional power hub by implementing several hydropower projects and building power transmission and distribution. This mega project will account for more than 40% of the installed generation capacity in the country and may produce more electricity than Ethiopia can use in the medium term. The plant, with its 6,000 megawatts of installed power and 15.7 terawatt hour of annual energy production, is one of the most important projects in the Ethiopian government's commitment to meet the country's present and future power requirements. The project is supposed to support the economic development of Ethiopia, to secure the energy supply, to make Ethiopia less dependent on oil imports, and to provide electricity to a number of neighboring countries. Ethiopian international rivers also have a number of potential sites for irrigation, and this could be taken as a resource blessing to the nation. National consensus over construction of GERD and the end of Egyptian hegemony and the basin could also be taken as a future resource blessing to the nation. The dam will be capable of handling a flood of 19,370 cubic meters per second. It will reduce alluvium in Sudan by 100 million cubic meters, and also facilitate irrigation of around 500,000 hectares of new agricultural land. So it's not only a blessing to Ethiopia, but also it's showing how it can also be a blessing to Ethiopia's neighbors. It will also reduce approximately 40 kilometers of flooding in Sudan upon its completion. But this is not the end of this story, because there is another aspect of these river basins that Dr. Dammag also presents in his paper, which is the paradox of plenty, or resource scarce. So there are different justifications that I will be presenting in the following slides regarding this resource scarce or paradox of plenty perspective regarding the river basins in Ethiopia. The first one is a resource scarce perspective on our international rivers could be attributed to the following factors. The first one is downstream states, policy and perception related factors, policy of exclusion and perception of natural and historic rights. And this is established in various agreements. For example, in the case of the Abai, the case of the Blue Nile, Egypt's perception of establishing these historic rights it can be viewed in agreements such as the 1929 Nile Agreement and also the 1959 Nile Agreement, which basically gives no water allocation for Ethiopia, despite about 86% of the water source of the Nile coming from Ethiopia. The second factor is Egypt's water securitization move. Egypt has long held veto power over any upstream development of Nile water, supported by one of the largest armies in the region and wielding considerable soft power leverage. The Egyptian government has on various occasions declared any dam building upstream to be a cause as barely should it lead to lower inflow into Egypt. Egypt's tendency of inspecting all projects proposed in Ethiopia and blocking international fund. For example, Egypt blocked Fincha sugar factory implementation international fund for 22 years. Fincha River.
Dr. Frey, what you have 2 minutes.
Okay, just a tributary of Abai River. The factors continue. I should probably rush to the conclusion since there are only 2 minutes. But this curse is not only about the Nile, but also the other river basins, because in all the river basins, Ethiopia is an upstream state, and downstream countries raise various issues, and this leads to controversies. So the conclusion: due to above mentioned paradox of the plenty, the country has utilized less than 10% of its potential for hydropower generation so far. Due to this complex mix of paradox of the plenty and blessing mix, the backbone of Ethiopian economy, agriculture, is highly rainfall dependent, pushing the country to one of the poorest nations, and the energy source relies on fuel wood and left more than 65% of the population with no access to electricity and still dependent on traditional energy sources. The rapid increase in population necessitates an adequate management of Ethiopia's transboundary water resources. Economic growth and structural transformation is unthinkable without proper utilization of our international rivers. The way forward, therefore, is joint management, trust building, and creating legal and institutional mechanisms in the basin. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Frey-Wet, on behalf of the MECE for this very rich presentation on transboundary resources as a source of conflict or source of cooperation, but also whether a plenty of resources is a curse or blessing. Thanks for that. I think now we have Dr. Temasgen, who is going to talk about peace broker or barrier UN in the Eritrean-Ethiopian border conflict. That is, it has a dimension of an external role. Yesterday we had some comments and issues which were asking for the role of external actors. So the UN as an external actor, we are looking into how external actors either facilitate or hamper conflict resolution. So please, Dr. Temasgen, the floor is yours.
I hope I'm being here listening.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello. Okay. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I would prefer to use the audio only. And I would also like to thank you for everyone who is participating in this conference. So my topic, as it is stated, is the role of, maybe not the role of, but how do we assess the intervention, the UN role in the Eritrea-Ethiopia border conflict, which took place around 2 decades. So the question is, how viable is the
Hello, Dr. Temasgen.
I think it's
Yeah, continue. We can hear you. Yes.
Let me continue and okay. The question is, can we see the UN as viable institution to solve the crisis in the Horn of Africa? And I want to look at it from the experience that the UN had in the Eritrea-Ethiopia border conflict, because from yesterday's discussion, we know that the entire Horn of Africa is in a security crisis, and the UN is supposed to have at least a positive role in solving this problem. So my question is, how viably the United Nations as institution and the conceptual framework it uses to settle conflicts.
We lost you, Dr. Temasgen.
The problem after the kind of the popular government in Ethiopia in 2018, and this agreement was reached without the real intervention of the United Nations. The United Nations had been part of this process for a long time, but at least at the end of the peace deal, it was not. So looking at the United Nations as the main actor in solving crisis in the rest of the world, and even the pillars of the United Nations imply that
We lost you again, Dr. Temasgen.
Yes, I think my connection is in and out. So let me be brief so that everybody will have at least a clue of my paper. So what's the main contents of the United Nations, the role of the United Nations in the Eritrea-Ethiopia border conflict, and what was the guiding principle of the United Nations in terms of its involvement in solving conflicts in the post-Cold War period. We know that the UN peace agenda after the 1992 was after the end of the Cold War was guided by the peace and agenda policy that was initiated by Boutros. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Continue.
Hello. So this peace and agenda policy was based on the assumption that it was in fact guided by the principle of course, the neoliberal principle, the neoliberal agenda of handling problems, and the content of the peace and agenda policy of the United Nations was to see basically promote neoliberal ideals and weak states, which sees weak states as the threat to their own society. So it promotes liberal peace, where
Reddy, is there a way for him to send his paper by email and then maybe you can read it?
No, I don't think so.
sure, of course, I have a finished paper, but the problem is, can I come after and maybe two presenters? Let me find some way to settle my technical problem. Of course, it was my choice to come into the front.
Well, I think the best is you continue with that on and off. So please continue.
Okay, so this liberal peace promotes political and economic liberalization as key elements in realizing peace in the war-torn societies. So democratization was the best principle to settle peace and bring societies together to handle their crisis. So having this kind of policy, the United Nations came with this agenda, this sort of entered into the Eritrea-Ethiopia border conflict with sort of neoliberal peace. So what were the role of the United Nations? In what forms did the United Nations play in the Eritrea-Ethiopia border conflict? The United Nations had three roles across the in last 20 years of peace conflict between Eritrea and it. One, it was a passive promoter of peace through legitimizing the initiatives during the first 2 or 3 complete or war broke out between Eritrea and Ethiopia. The United Nations had a kind of a secondary role by promoting the initiatives that were taken by the UN, the US, and Rwanda 1, and the African Union 2. And regional states had also initiated certain was the longest the United Nations had in the Eritrea border conflict. And in this role, the UN, of course, played a great role in terms of maintaining ceasefire between Eritrea and Ethiopia, but failed to deliver a long-lasting peace that was supposed to happen by implementing the boundary commission decision of 2002. And the third form of UN intervention in the conflict was by the imposing of sanction over one of the disputants, which is Eritrea. Of course, the sanction had its own impact in debating the peace process that was signed in Algiers in 2000 after that brought about the completion, the ceasefire. Actually, a process of peace process between that could take place between Eritrea and Ethiopia. And having all these forms of role in the conflict, what was the problem? Why the United Nations did not have such viable way of handling this problem? One, there's of course UN intervention in during the war was not clear. It was vague, and most of the time had a secondary role. But in terms of way how it affects, how it promoted the peace process between Eritrea and Ethiopia. One, there was incompatibility between the nature of the conflict. Most of the time, the neoliberal peace was designed to handle intrastate conflicts. That was the dominant form of conflicts in Africa since the end of the Cold War. The Eritrea-Ethiopia border conflict was the single case, the interstate conflict must involve a full-fledged war. So the peace and agenda, the UN form mode of peace that was started to implement after the process, and it opened a door for all forms of international or regional intervention in the case. The idea that a multiple interplayers would help to promote peace in conflict, to promote peace, is part of the post-Cold War peace and agenda policy project of the United Nations. So it immediately after the conflict started between Eritrea and Ethiopia, it immediately internationalized the conflict, and the disputant states disowned the nature of the conflict in the process itself. So it was dominated by international actors, and these actors, of course, had the neoliberal principles that wants to to see the region further. Architecture of the national and regional peace conflict architecture of the region. Most of the time, when the war between Eritrea and Ethiopia started, the ENC, the crisis as international threat. And international threat, in a sense, the international threat was defined as a threat that doesn't allow the neoliberal principles, that doesn't allow the implementation of the neoliberal principles. So most of the causes and the reasons of this conflict was regional, maybe internal to the two conflicting or disputant states. But when it comes to the solution proposed by the United Nations, it was looking from the international perspective, and the international perspective was dominant by the neoliberal principles. So these three elements of the UN's peace building approach actually failed to handle the Ethio-Eritrea conflict that took place for 2 decades. I would like to hello.
Hello, continue.
Dr. Ari. Okay, so I think, well, it's very uncomfortable to say that I have come to the end of my paper, but at least these three elements of the neoliberal peace building that is carried out by the United Nations in between Eritrea-Ethiopia border conflict disallowed the United Nations, or disarmed the United Nations to be key player in solving the problem. So if you look at from the regional perspective, the United Nations need to readjust its instruments and mode of intervention in solving crisis. I think that's my paper. I hope I'm being heard, at least part of it, but I'm happy to share the full paper with everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Tamasgan. A very rich in both conceptual and theoretical. Unfortunately, the connection was bad, and there were many people saying that they cannot hear you or follow you. Hopefully, the paper will be available to those who are attending. So with that, I will now invite Professor Mohammed Saleh. So please, Mohammed Saleh, the floor is yours. Professor Mohammed Saleh, you are muted. We can't hear you.
It's okay.
Now it's okay. Yes, you can hear now.
Yeah, okay, yeah, okay. I just started by saying mentioning the title of the presentation, Borders, People and the State in the Horn of Africa. In fact, I'm speaking from Addis Ababa, so if it is the same place where the Megigo has his problems, I hope that I will not go through the same process, but I hope that my connection is a little bit better than that. Let me start like that. You know, if the title of this paper, if it is to be addressed theoretically, of course, it falls within the remit of the functions of the state, and one of the main functions of the state is maintaining sovereignty and national integrity, in addition to the others. And also can be addressed from social contract theory between citizen and the state, and to what extent the state has lived up to its promise of protecting citizens' life, property, and other rights in exchange of their natural rights. But also it could be dealing with the predatory state, particularly in our case in the Horn of Africa. The role of the state is to generate revenues and to use these revenues for financing all other functions of the state, like the provision of social good, maintenance of peace and order, and others. So I don't have to go through that. My choice is to make this presentation somehow, let me try to share my screen with you, is to make it more empirical and look at those theoretical aspects from a grounded theory viewpoint, rather than to talk about the theory and then try to fit the case of the Horn of Africa about. So, this is what I want to share with you. I started by the structure is simple introduction in which I talk about disputed borders, not all of them, just some people and claimant states over these borders, proven and potential natural resources, and then current state of play. And if you look, for instance, at this table here, you see I talk about the disputed boundaries, and in fact there are porous boundaries. Then about the border, about the length of it or the size of it. In most cases, in fact, it is not even very precise. About the disputed states, about the people concerned. I mean, of course, I don't say Ethiopians, but the particular groups and communities in the areas that are disputed. And then the proven and potential natural resources, and some of them, of course, have been exploited and the rest of it. And then the current state of play. For me, I don't want to talk about the history of it. I just wanted to show in every case that where are we now, and are the omens and the signs from these various disputed boundaries, borders or borderlands, whether these are, as we look at them today, to what extent they present security challenges in the Horn of Africa. So, for instance, I just go through them very fast. You have the Elmi Triangle, and here you have the ethnic groups. Of course, you know them. That is Kenya, South Sudan. I put Ethiopia between two with a question mark, because I don't see that Ethiopia is as aggressively challenging in this border like Kenya and South Sudan. And the resources there, of course, are very well known, because the Elmi Triangle is some sort of an extension to Omo Turkana Lake. And that's known, of course, for land, water, and minerals. And as you know, that Kenya's oil exploration and production, of course, is concentrating around Lake Turkana. According to this dispute, which is very old, so one common thing among of all of these disputes is that they started during already started during the colonial period, and have different constellations of not necessarily open conflicts, but disputes about them, to whom they belong and to whom they do not belong. And we see that the latest, of course, because of these disputes, particularly after there is some proven oil in the area, and also proven gas and other minerals, these states, of course, became more active in asserting that these borders belong to them. And as far as where we are now, they have a South Sudan Kenya border committee, very well established, and it is very active in trying to solve these conflicts over these resources. And then you have also Nadabal. It is about 25 kilometers long area between South Sudan and Kenya. Of course, the Tobosa and the Turkana are in this area. It is known to be very lucrative in trade. It is a crossing hub between Kenya and South Sudan, but also you can consider it also an extension of the Elemi Triangle. Also, it is rich in minerals. We know that this area, for instance, Tobosa and Tidinga groups have been, they have this open beach gold mining for since the 1970s, and in fact by the 80s and the 90s it became also a very lucrative gold, also a source of financing, of course, financing the rebel groups in this area. Again, the same committee, the technical joint committee between South Sudan and Kenya, is very active. They met several times. The last meeting also they have, I think, in November 2020. The Kajukaji border also area, that is including Uganda, the South Sudan. This border is very interesting because the colonialists, in the way they were trying to demarcate the border, it is one of the rare cases that the borders are where they adopted the tribal borders as the national borders, or the border separating South Sudan from Uganda. And this also gave these ethnic groups it somehow strengthened their position vis-a-vis where the border is, and of course with the trade route, claiming a very big portion of this trade route also give them a lot of economic benefits. Of course, in addition to the fact that the area is the Kajukaji area is also very rich in timber and other resources. Again, the latest clashes, particularly between the Madi and Kuku tribes, took place between Ugandan ethnic groups from their side and the Kuku, of course, these are the South Sudanese on their side. And also this border also involved a number of other liberation movements that also feel that the control of this area will give them a lot of economic benefits. Also, we have the Megingo that is between Kenya and Uganda. It is a small island. Imagine it's only 2,000 square meters, very dense. It has a Lu from the Kenyan side and the Bazuba from the Ugandan side. The Ugandans made a very interesting claim. They said, okay, the island belongs to Kenya, but the water belongs to us. And you know the 2018 skirmishes or the attempt, of course, by the Ugandans to vacate the Kenyan fishermen and women. But the area is also very rich, not just water and fish. It has, in fact, it's a production of tilapia amounts to hundreds of millions of dollars. In addition, of course, we always have rumors that the area has, this part of Lake Victoria has gold and has minerals. And they have a bilateral committee for the demarcation of the border. They started surveying the international boundaries, not only the lake, but the whole international boundaries. But they have not yet completed their work. Now, we notice that, by the way, these committees exist in all of these different cases, but unfortunately, they never complete their work. And so probably the countries that feel that probably they are going to lose from the process of demarcation would try to delay the process as long as, or to freeze the conflict until they were able to have it in the future. Of course, the case of Abiy is very well known, and the latest happened, of course, in 2012, just 1 year after the independence of South Sudan. It attacked the Hijlij oil fields, and this conflict was frozen for quite a number of years. 2020 was the change of government in Khartoum. South Sudan and Sudan government, they have joined a committee, and they again said, okay, we will solve it peacefully, but nothing. At least now, the situation in around Hijlij, Abyei area is very peaceful. And by the way, in this area, it is not only one border dispute. I think there are 8 areas along the border between Sudan and South Sudan, something like close to 4,080 kilometers long. Abyei is only 1 out of 7 or 8 areas that are disputed. In fact, coming from very close to the border with Ethiopia all the way to the border with Hufrat al-Nahas, an area that is very close to the border between South Sudan and Central African Republic. Al-Fashaga, of course, between Sudan and Ethiopia. Also, you know, here are the two claimant countries, Ethiopia and Sudan. The population there, Amhara, Gemman, Tigrinja, and from the Sudanese side, the Shukriya, Battahin, Kawahla, and Lahawiyin, we call them. And the land is very fertile, agricultural land, but and also it has rivers. It's also make it even more important. But of course, the rumors always have is that it has great potential of minerals, particularly gas and gold. And in fact, before the conflict started between Sudan and Ethiopia, I understand that there were even some talks between business sector between Sudanese and Ethiopian to start, you know, having some joint activities and producing making use of these resources. Of course, we know that the Sudanese armed forces advanced into Al-Fashaga, the early stage of the Tigray conflict, and of course it is still there. Then the other case that is important case is Dumera and Dumera Island, or islands, you can say. The area, it's not that big. Let me see if I can show it, because not many people deal with it as Dumera. it is this part here. It is very close, Ras Dumeira, this is Eritrea and Djibouti. It is very close to the to Bab el Mandeb. This few kilometers linking the Red Sea with the Indian Ocean. It is very important. In fact, you can say you can use Ras Dumeira as an alternative to Djibouti ports. It is within the same proximity. And of course, if this part of Dumeira is taken by a rival, for instance, to NATO, which is dominating, or the AFRICOM, which is the US dominated by these powers, then of course the whole area will be the largest concentration. So in fact, you cannot talk just about the resource being a natural resource, but also the location and the geophysical and geopolitical importance of the area. Then if we come back to what happened until now, we see that here it is strategic international navigation route with proximity to Bab el Mandeb and all of that. So I said this, but Eritrea occupied it. And then in 2017, they were Qatari peacekeepers. It was also very important. It shows that these conflicts between our countries that also in one way or another involve some of these international actors or Middle Eastern, like in this case, countries. It having the peacekeepers from Qatar. They left in 2017 when the Qataris have their problems with the Egyptians, the Saudis, and the United Arab Emirates. Of course, they prefer to. 2018, Djibouti tried to raise the issue to the United Nations level. The United Nations proposed that this thing is better be resolved by the AU. So there is mediation going on. The interesting thing is that, of course, Djibouti was very sympathetic to the lifting of and welcomed the lifting of sanctions against Eritrea and all of that. It means that really the situation in all these cases that I have shown is that they are ongoing negotiations, there are ongoing discussions, there is recognition that there is a problem, there are committees being established. So that's why for me, these warmongers who tell you that the war is imminent, according to me personally, I talk about that later on, it is not imminent. Now, what is the problem now? The problem is when I talk about borders, people and borders, I want to present, I came up with this, of course, I'm always happy if some people can enrich it, that will be even better. I came with 4 borders and borderland paradigms. And these are very important because they shape peace and conflict in our region. And some of them are interstate, others, in fact, are much bigger. They are transnational in their nature. And some of them, of course, are very much community-based, and the other one is very exclusionary and all of that. So we have the first paradigm that talk about borders as ungovernable spaces invested with cross-border and transnational criminals, human trafficking, drugs, illicit trade, and excise and tax evasion, arms struggling, transnational terrorism, money laundering, cattle rustling. Now, many of us said, okay, this cattle rustling seems just a cultural thing between tribes. No. In fact, during the last 2 decades, cattle rustling became, even within our continent, it is transboundary. You have cattle being stolen from South Sudan or from Sudan, being sold because, of course, the West African countries are, particularly when you go to the Sahelian part of it, they have a shortage of meat and beef and others. They go up to there. And sometimes cattle, in fact, is being rustled or being the cattle theft in some parts of Ethiopia. They will go also across the borders, whether to Sudan or South Sudan or northern parts of Kenya or even further afield than just that. So it's also became cattle rustling. It is really now completely changed from localized activities to transnational activities. I think some would even say that this cattle rustling nowadays is not only across borders, but also some cattle are exported to Saudi Arabia and to other places through the Red Sea. So this paradigm. Unfortunately, this is the most dominant paradigm. And that paradigm does not resonate very well when I talk with the other paradigm. It's outward looking. It is more about international and transnational processes and how crimes are described and all of that. Then you come to the second paradigm, and that is the issue of territoriality or nativism, they call it, overt or covert migration, migrants, or describing anti-migrants, describing migrants as aliens. That means that the borders are barriers, spaces of exclusion, chauvinism, xenophobia, racism, human rights abuses, denial of economic, social, and cultural rights. And of course, we see these processes also in some of our, in some countries in our, not necessarily in our region, but in other African countries, particularly what happened to the Ghanaian immigrants in Nigeria, when Nigeria had the oil and not long time ago, what happened, for instance, to the Ethiopians and others, particularly West Africans in South Africa, and all of that. And then we have the other paradigm, and this is the dominant paradigm that we have among the African states, that borders and borderless are spaces of interstate and regional integration. For instance, at the continental level, continental jurisdictions, of course, you talk about the African Continental Free Trade Area, and also other arrangements between different sub-regional groups in terms of trade. And that is what you call productive integration, macroeconomic integration, infrastructure, education, free movement of people across the African borders. This is still our lofty, for me, it is lofty aspirations in a sense that it has not been implemented, but that is a way also looking at the borders in a much more positive way from an African African perspective.
Professor, you have
then you have the last one.
3 minutes left.
Yes, absolutely, I will finish in 3 minutes.
Okay.
Then you have the spaces of intercommunal, socio-cultural, political, and economic symbiosis. Simply because the border communities, they consider these borders pre-modern, and also pre-modern and also pre-modern state formation. They are very old. They are comprised of identifiable cultural and social groups and communities. They interact, they move through these borders freely. For them, these borders are natural. They are not barriers, but they are open. So my observations are very simple. These borders have two different meanings. Borders, meaning that that border is not governed by the legalities that control the international, that confine to the international laws governing border crossing between states. And the other one, of course, in most cases, border communities that really shun this kind of definition, this legal definition, and think of the borders as a natural extension to each other's pre-existence. Other observation, most cases disputed borders are remote. They say semi-acephalous, but not necessarily. They are not integrated nationally, regionally with the global economy through the sale of certain commodities from these areas. Let me not go through all of that. Let me just come to conclusions. I say it, and it probably will be in other meeting. Remind me, Mohammed, I have lied. But wars between the Horn of Africa states, all over war, over disputed borders, is remote. So we listen to the CNN or all different kind of academics from the West and all of that. It is for me, it is remote, and I give the reasons here. And none of this has I showed that in all of them there are negotiations and discussions happening, and that none of the claimant states severed diplomatic or economic relations with other states. That peaceful coexistence and movement of people across borders, even during the wars, continued. And I can tell you, it happens today between Eritrea and Tigray, and also in the border areas in the Amhara region. I just came from Bahar Dar, and I can tell you that I noticed that between the people, the issues are not as big between the political elites and warmongers. And also, but we should not preclude or exclude the occurrence of limited skirmishes, either between the armies of these countries or between militias or between ethnic groups that want to have control over these very lucrative transborder resources, natural resources, or transhuman ethnic groups that move according to seasonal variations, and move from one border to the other in order to take advantage of agricultural or grazing lands. But also there will be localized conflicts between ethnic groups with historical animosities and hostilities for farming and so and so. So my important line is that the war between the Horn of Africa states, I mean, the states of the Horn of Africa, a war over these borders is not as imminent as we have been told. Thank you for your attention. I stop here.
Thank you, Professor Mohammed Saleh. We have three very, very rich presentations. Briefly, I think Professor Mohammed Saleh's paper could be summarized with one or two sentences, and that is the international borders, which are naturally artificial or not natural, lead to different sources of conflicts. One is need and interest of the people to move freely, especially when you have people divided across the international borders. And on the other side, the need of the state to control and sovereignty of the state. So this is the basic problem we have in these porous, artificially delineated and demarcated border lines. And then we have a paper by Dr. Dammake, which is on the management or mismanagement of border resources. It also discusses whether plenty of resources is a curse or a blessing, but also it could bring those who are involved in that transboundary conflict to peace and cooperation. And then the third paper, unfortunately, due to the bad connectivity, we were not able to benefit from the rich content, but it is about the neoliberal approach to peace building, where it led to internationalization of the problem and the conflict. Thereby, it failed to resolve or to bring permanent solution to the conflict. So briefly, these are the guests of the three papers. I think we have about 1 hour. So let me open it for discussion, comments. So please direct your questions or whatever comments you have to the speaker. So it's open for discussion. And you can raise your hand. Well, please raise your hand and don't be shy. The speakers are ready and willing to. Okay, Adam Babikir, please forward your question or comments.
Yeah, thank you, Mohammed Saleh, for your presentation. Unfortunately, I couldn't follow Dr. Temazgan. That's why I'm not have for him question. But my question it's not question, but it is maybe just like comment. I want to see from the presentation of Mohammed Saleh, what's the reason of all these things, what he said about the border dispute. What I know, I am the son of the border between Sudan and Ethiopia. I'm Groze. For us, the border is different, not like the people who in state, especially who are in the capital. So always when the people come to sit and to discuss about the border, how to solve the problem of the border, always they put the solution of the state. They didn't look to the local communities who live at the borders. So if we want to solve this problem among all the Horn of African countries, we must listen to voices of local communities. This is very important for the solution. As we know, peace is very important for all Horn African countries because they live together. And always the problem of the borders in all of Horn of Africa countries, they arise when there is problem between the capitals. What I mean by the capitals of the states. For example, if there is a problem between Asmara and Addis, or between Mogadishu and Addis, or between Khartoum and Addis, the problem will, or the dispute will present at the borders. And the people who live at the border, they pay the cost of these disputes. So what I want for Dr. Mohammed Saleh to take to his account is the local people who live at the border, who they have different meaning for the border. Thank you.
Can we collect some additional questions or comments before we give the speakers to respond? Adane, could you forward your question or comment?
Okay. Thank you for the wonderful presentations. Just my question is very short. It goes to Dr. Freot. I think she raised about the curse and the blessing side of the waters or rivers. And my question is, I didn't understand about the curse side of the water. I think that all rivers are blessing for Ethiopia and for all nations, and I understand that way. But if she says something about the curse side of the rivers, I would like to hear from her again, just to understand more about that side. Thank you.
Thank you. There is in the chat. Let me another question. There is a question in the chat which says there is no Afar state in the Horn. Thus, the conflict is between Eritrea and Djibouti, where in both countries the two brothers of Afar resides. I think that will be to Professor Mohammed Saleh. And then Ashanafi. Please go ahead, Ashanafi.
Thank you, Reddy. So my question goes to Dr. Temasgen and Dr. Mohammed. So my question is, this transboundary conflict has been there for so many years. Many scholars has been searching and presenting the reasons and the main cause of this transboundary conflict. It's like most of the reasons are like resources and navigation routes. Whereas coming to the lasting solutions, we've been discussing on the problems for the last 30 years, but we were not being able to secure a lasting peace and a solution for this one. So for both scholars, who do you think is the right body to bring a lasting solution for this transboundary conflicts? Is it the countries themselves, is it the African Union, or the UN organization? Thank you.
Abdulaziz Ali, could you go ahead, please?
Okay, thank you for giving me the mic. My question goes to Mohammed Salah. Mohammed Salah, can you hear me? Okay, although your paper is not very related to my question, but still it's very, it needs to raise. And let me start my question. We know that Ethiopia proposed to the British colonial office that it grants an access to the sea through Somaliland territory up to the border of Sela. And regarding to a lot of insights from the scholars who are focusing from the Horn of Africa narratives, said that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is bringing the equation that the need of the board into the play since he came to power in 2018. In addition to that, although it was not officially, or it was not an official talk that the recent Somaliland president visit to Ethiopia, but confidential sources told that it came into the talks between the two heads, Musa Bihi and Abiy Ahmed. And Ethiopia, they say Ethiopia has a dual purpose for getting a boat, one thing to affect the corridor into the sea that the predecessors of the Abiy Ahmed couldn't able to lobby, and wanted to make a naval base at Sela ahead of the United Kingdom and Russia. So my question is like this. Do you think, Mohammed, that this will contribute to the regional integration between the Horn of Africa states, or it will contribute to the security crisis that in the Horn of Africa is facing now? Is it clear?
I think it is clear. Thank you. Brahane Walda Mikael will be on the second round. So please bear with us. Let us now give to the presenters to respond to the questions. I will start with the reverse order. First will respond Dr. Frahiwat, and then Dr. Tamasgan, lastly, Professor Mohammed Saleh. Please, Dr. Frahiwat, go ahead.
Okay, so there was only one question, which is directed to the Dr. Dameka's presentation. So basically, Dr. Dameka's argument is that the river basins are predominantly a blessing to Ethiopia. And this particular argument is made regarding the river basins, regarding the accomplishment of Ethiopia's national interests on these river basins. And towards the beginning or the first part of the findings, presentation of findings, you can see that in a lot of ways they are indeed a blessing because of their huge potential, particularly for the production of hydroelectric power. And it also states that currently, the country's hydroelectric power particularly comes from hydroelectric power production. So it's predominantly a blessing, but the curse side comes in when Ethiopia, because Ethiopia is an upstream country to all these 12 river basins, and the utilization of these river basins are highly resisted by downstream countries, and the fact that we don't really have established kind of legal frameworks, be it at the regional level and also at the international level, regarding how upstream countries and downstream countries should make use of their river basins is problematic for Ethiopia particularly, because downstream countries, for example, on the Nile, Egypt is raising a number of issues. Sudan is also raising a number of other issues. For example, he mentions the historical rights argument that's raised by Egypt, and also the securitization. And these kinds of issues, makes, or it doesn't make the river basins a curse entirely, but really prevents Ethiopia to use of its river basins to the maximum. And that's creating problems, particularly considering the poverty situation in Ethiopia, and considering what Ethiopia could have done if downstream countries allowed Ethiopia to make use of the river basin, not only for hydroelectric power production, but also for irrigation. So it's not the very existence of these river basins which is considered as a curse, but rather the fact that there is lack of legal framework to enable Ethiopia to utilize its river basins to the maximum. Yeah, thank you. I think that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Freiwat. Dr. Tamaskan, are you available?
Okay.
Please go
I'm
ahead.
sure, yes. Okay, the question comes from Shanafi is whether there is any agent or institution that could come with a lasting peace to the transboundary conflicts in the Horn of Africa. Well, to my point, I wouldn't say there is a monopolization from one institution, that since we are very much connected towards each other and there are so many actors in a conflict internally and externally, I would say it's a combination of multiple actors and their commitment. But I would say that the internal aspect is very important. Most of the conflicts caused by internal causes. Internal causes in the sense that if it's intrastate within the conflicting or the disputant elements, there is a serious disagreement. And if it's transboundary, there is a conflict between the two states or the it's a issue of so many factors, but I would say since the internal factors are the causes of the conflicts, we need, in fact, one of the askers, one of the person who says about how do we handle the internal factors, the internal actors, the local actors. So what I would say is to give ample opportunity for the disputant elements to play, as they play the major role in raising this conflict, to reduce the level of conflict. But the combination of multiple elements, the international critical.
Are you done, Professor Dr. Tamasgan?
Yes, I'm done. I'm done.
Okay, thank you. So, Professor Muhammad Saleh, please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. I think that because the communication with Dr. Tamasgan was not that clear, I can start by what is the right body for managing disputes or conflicts between states in this over borders or over borderlands. Now, there are a number of mechanisms available. That is, of course, the one, the multilateral, international, that is in the United Nations. And the disputes that happened in our subcontinent so far, if you look at the, where is it? Okay, I think I don't see it, but the two that we have, one, the one, the Eritrea, Ethiopia, of course, that is, we know it went to the International Court of Justice. ABA went to International Court of Justice, and the October judgment of the International Court of Justice also, in which it gave a little bit favored Somalia, and Kenya rejected the October resolution. So this is one. But we see that in the other cases, it is the states were trying to resolve the issue among themselves and creating this border committees. I think what we have not experimented with so far, and that will bring me back to the first question that I have about, from Adam, who talked that he was saying that borders are about communities, and any solution to any border issue must be very mindful of the role of the communities and necessity that those communities should continue interacting with each other in a very peaceful way, and they can also become future enablers for regional or even integration between the two countries. So I agree with him that you see, the more, it's not only in borders, any issue that is taken away from communities and put either in the domain of the state or the international bodies, it does not favor the solutions. Often do not favor the communities, because it is interesting to say this. Why? Because we assume that the state is serving the interests of the communities, but in most cases we find that the states are not serving the states, and not talk about the state, talk about the elite. The elite take border disputes to sometimes even to settle internal divisions, and say the more the dispute, the more the elite show themselves as being very nationalistic and patriotic and all of that, they completely forget the local communities and try to solve it in a particular way, because they see that there is some political leverage and advantages coming to them within their own internal politics, you know. So it is. I agree with you. I mean, between Sudan and Ethiopia, the area of Fashag, I said you came from that area. Proposals were made already during the 70s and early 80s that in that particular area they should make what you call joint administrative communities. Strange enough, during the colonial period, every year during the harvesting season, the leaders of the two of the ethnic groups from the two sides of the border, they come together and resolve the problem. And I can tell you, I come from Sudan. Many Sudanese prefer that they go to Gondar to solve their land issues, even with Sudanese, than to go to Gadarif. Why? Because they found that there is many advantages for them not to be part of this system. Why? Because this system, these different ethnic groups, they have divisions between them, and also they have competition over the same resources. So they wanted to go to a neutral arbiter somewhere outside their, but they never considered this is something that outside their country. They are going out there to solve a problem. So the idea of joint administrative regions, we never tried. For instance, in West Africa, most countries that solve this kind of problem, they gave the local community, they gave them the choice. After 10 years, decide whether, after the solution is reached, do you want to stay in this side of the border, or do you want to go to the other side? And of course, this is exactly what happened between Burkina Faso and Mali and other countries. So there are many mechanisms. There is international mechanism, but the remaining border issues that we have now in the Horn of Africa, I see that the solution is to look at interstate solutions. And the importance of the international bodies, particularly like the International Court of Justice, once these things are codified in the international law, it becomes very difficult for states, for instance, to go back. So there is multiple ways of resolving it. And therefore, I think for you, just to say that borders are about communities, and these are very ancient communities, and they have a lot of in common among them. I agree with that. I never said that Afar is a state. In the tables that I put out there, I showed who are the people in these areas. Who are the people? So in some areas, I said the people are the Anwak or the Tobosa or other, or the Kuku or the Mandi, and all of these different. So these are the people, not the state. So the conflict is not between the Afar, but for me, the conflict is between the Eritrean state and the Djiboutian state. It's not between the Afar people. The Afar people are on both sides of the border. And I don't think that is the Afar people who went out and occupied the Dumeira Islands or created the issue between them. Don't forget that this is not a new issue. It started already in 2016, the first time. There is a second round of debate about it, that is 1926. And then there is a fourth one. I think it was a very long standing thing. And I think that there is a way to resolve it. But the area is so important geopolitically that also interests of some other, Arab states, in that particular area, and also, global powers' interest in that area probably might make the solution to it a little bit difficult. But so far, the countries, the way I see it, most of these conflicts are frozen. And the hope is that maybe through time, they will find some solution to them. Now, I'm asked a question about Zaylan, about Berber, and all of that. And to me, until now, one would like to see, because as you yourself have said, there are some confidential reports, there are leaks, and that there is a visit of the Somaliland president to Ethiopia, and some sort of discussions taken place. I think the only fact that I know is that Somaliland has an embassy in Ethiopia. So you don't give an embassy to a country that you do not have some level of recognition of that country. So maybe that bilateral relationship taking place today between Somaliland and Ethiopia, one would expect, of course, different types of cooperation to take place between them. Now, the issue of naval bases, it is for us also. I found it very, from our side as Africans, we found it very a little bit strange. We are very happy that the Chinese and the Americans and the United Arab Emirates and the Qataris and the Turks and the Russians and everybody has naval bases in our countries. But when we say that, okay, Sudan want to have a naval base in Zaila or in Djibouti, it becomes a very big problem. So I don't know why we are so sensitive towards Ethiopia wants to have a naval port. Now, whether it is economically capable of having a naval base to the extent that will become a threat to the Horn of Africa, of course, that has to be seen from the reality of Ethiopian politics and economics and its geopolitical position in the Horn of Africa. But we should not be too sensitive to our navies also to have bases in other African countries. It might be even interested in if Ethiopia is strong enough to say that we want to have a naval base in Dakar or Casablanca.
Thank you, Professor Mohammed Saleh. And now the second round of questions and comments. Let me give the opportunity to Brahane Walda-Mikhael. Please, Brahane Walda-Mikhael, go ahead. And then we will come to Moses Kisa. Brahane Walda-Mikhael, are you there?
Thank you. Yes, unmuted now. Thank you, Chair. Well, thank you very much for all the presentations. Indeed, as you said, Chair, rich presentations on their own rights. The issue I want to raise is a real situation. Yesterday, Dr. Jonas gave us a general presentation focusing on youth empowerment and the development of governmental and regional institutions. I don't dismiss these issues. They are important, of course. And today we had again general presentations by the two Ethiopian presenters. Dr. Temesgen on the issue of border between Eritrea and Ethiopia, and our lady presenter on issues of curse or blessing of natural resources. All these are important, of course, but I think current events have overtaken these important issues. They should have been related to the current issues. Youth in Ethiopia, to speak about youth empowerment when the youth is dragged to attend a civil war, university students dragged to the war front. What youth empowerment are we talking about? Institutional development, governmental and regional, like IGAD, governmental development, government institutions. What government institutions can we talk about in Ethiopia at the moment? The very existence of the nation state is at stake. The very existence. All these presentations should have been linked to that problem. We are talking here about security and peace and things like that. And we seem to be hedging this important question. So my question to the presenters is it by choice you went to these general presentations when you have a real issue in Ethiopia, the fragmentation of the nation state, civil war, a near genocide situation happening. There is a lack of security. And this should have, I think we have lost the opportunity in this conference to discuss these issues. And I would like some comments from the presenters. Thank you.
Thank you. Moses?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Reddy. I hope you hear me.
Yes, we hear you.
I had been muted. I couldn't unmute myself, and I'm unmuted now. Yeah, I wanted to thank the three presenters. All of them gave us very rich and informative presentations. I wanted to especially thank Professor Mohammed Salah for giving us a very detailed, comprehensive, and insightful exploration of the cross-border territorial disputes. But I wanted especially to thank him for underlining a very optimistic perspective about, you know, the prospects for peace. And I'm saying this because, now I want to speak like an African and not a scholar, not an academic. There's a lot of, you know, conflict mechanizing that goes on with the African continent. There's a lot of trying to promote conflict and to have Africa remain in endless cycles of violence and war. And we see this with the current conflict in Ethiopia. You know, there are actors, external actors, who want to see Ethiopia in chaos, who want to see Africa in endless war and conflict. And they engage in narratives and certain propaganda actions aimed at giving us a picture of a self-fulfilling prophecy when we end up with a kind of crisis as we have in Ethiopia. So the cross-border territorial disputes that Professor Mohammed Salah ably outlined, these are, the kinds of problems that we Africans must solve and must deal with. And I think especially local agency and local, engagements, because these are not entirely new problems. These problems have been around since even before, colonial times, but there are indigenous and very robust ways of Africans dealing with these kinds of crises. But when they become internationalized, and they are taken up by merchants of conflict, by individuals and organizations whose careers depend on conflicts in Africa, then we end up with, exacerbation and proliferation of conflicts, starting up even situations that are not entirely of a conflict nature and making them the business of merchants of conflict who want to see situations that can make them relevant, situations that can make them have careers. And you see that with organizations like the International Crisis Group. What they have been doing with the conflict in Ethiopia is to cheer one side to the conflict against another. And we Africans look on and are not outraged by, actors who promote our fighting, who want us to be fighting each other, instead of saying, no, we Ethiopians cannot fight one another, and let the external actors not promote our fighting and cheer us. Anyway, let me stop there, Dr. Reddy, but I enjoyed listening to the presentations, and I really thank Professor Mohammed Salah for giving us a very sober but informative perspective on the cross-border territorial disputes that have been happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Moses. Any other before I give the chance to respond to the speakers? Well, in the meanwhile, let us, Amaniel Mhretab, please present your question or
thank you very much. I would like to appreciate the presenters. This is very enlightening, but I'm a little bit not comfortable because nothing has been raised about the legacy of the colonial boundaries. We are just jumping it, or we are downplaying it, but that is the source that we are creating a problem in all African countries. This is the legacy of the colonial issue. So I would like to hear how do they look, because this is intermingled with the problems that we are facing. In all the border conflicts, there is no area where all ethnic groups are taken into consideration. They just divided into two, and that's the legacy we are living with. But I have never heard in the discussions or in the presentations. I was a little bit late, but I have not heard about this. I would like to hear from the presenters on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. So please, Dr. Freyuet, respond to the question which was raised referring to you.
I don't know if it's really directed to the presentation that I made on behalf of Dr. Dammega, but I think the issue is what's important and what's not important, and it's very difficult to agree upon what's important with everyone here. Of course, the civil war in Ethiopia is important. And personally, I'm not as pessimistic as the person who posed the question on the situation of Ethiopia now, because I'm also living here in Ethiopia, and I don't really think there is an existential threat right now, personally. But regarding what's important and what's not important, the issue of river basins, and because they're really, particularly in the case of Ethiopia, we all know what was happening around the GERD, and for me, it's really important to discuss the GERD in particular, and also the river basins in Ethiopia. And when I looked at the presentation, the paper that Dr. Dammega has prepared, I was very happy, because it's really an important issue to discuss. My argument is discussing the GERD and also other river basins in Ethiopia is very much important, because it affects the geopolitics of northeastern Africa, and it's an important security issue to discuss, even if other issues that the person who posed the question are also important. Yeah.
Thank you. Before I give the chance to Dr. Temesgen, I think we also need to keep in mind, when we, the executive committee of the Greater Horn Horizon Forum, articulated and formulated the concept note, we had specific themes as drivers of conflict. So for this panel, we put at the center of the driving factors transboundary resources and border disputes. That is the theme of this panel. So we need to keep in mind what is the theme of this specific panel. We can reach to other areas and other driving factors, but since we cannot deal with everything, we have formulated in a way, we have specific themes for the specific theme. Saying that, let me give to Dr. Temesgen to respond. Please, Dr. Temesgen.
Okay, I think like Brahane asked us about the issue of, first of all, he mixed me up with Ethiopians, so I'm from Eritrea. So maybe I can give from a distant observer of what is going on in Ethiopia, at least. So the question, I mean, he tries to talk, he should speak about the current issue, not the past, but we cannot separate the past and the present. They are too much related to each other, and dealing with the past means handling the current issue. So I think this is what I can say regarding Prahane's question. And regarding Amaniel, why we did not raise the colonial boundary aspect, the legacy of the colonial boundary.
Dr. Tamasgan, you see?
Doctor, yes, I am. So should we not raise the colonial issue boundary? Yes, but it's not part of the theme of the discussion. Otherwise, you are right. It is very important. One comment over Moses' intervention is that we should develop local agency, and we should not wait for external powers to tell us what to do and what not to do, of course, but we need framework. Without having any framework, we cannot actually unite our energy, our resources to make a difference in the conflicts of Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mohammed Saleh. I think in your presentation, even though it was not implicitly stated, when you said the porous borders, I think you were also referring to the colonial legacy of the border, international border. So it is part of that. So probably, I don't know if you can just make it clear so that we are even including the colonial legacy. So please go ahead, Professor Mohammed Saleh.
Okay, thank you very much. What I can do is that just me try to find what I was talking about. I think let me save time instead of going back to my files and come. You see, the first statement that I made is that all the conflicts that I have tried to capture in that table. By the way, this table is very, very rich. I said all of them have their origin in the colonial legacy, and in fact, in each case, the borders changed hands between countries more than 5 or 6 times. I give you just the case of Elem, the triangle. A certain time of the history of Kenya, the Kenyan government said to the Sudan, this place, it is far away, we have nothing to do with it. And they have the line. They have the line. Then they came later on. Sudan convinced, because Sudan convinced Kenya to take this triangle and pay for it administratively. Because Sudan, of course, because of the civil war in the south and all of that, is not able to do it. They have another line. Then later on, when the government of South Sudan took over, of course, Sudan sided with the government of South Sudan and said, okay, it was a long time ago when we are one country, the last arrangement that we have, that Sudan should look after the the administrative issues of the population in this area. And because the population, like the DeSantis, they are in Kenya and Sudan, in the triangle. So I don't have to say South Sudan because everybody gets very angry if you mention where it was. And the same thing with the other group, whether it is Tebosa, whether it is this, whether it is that. So until today, even the last skirmishes, 2020, in the Uganda-Sudan border, this simply, as I said earlier, because it is the first time the colonialists used tribal borders or they used ethnic groups borders to make them national borders. Now, many of us would say, oh, this is something very good. Now the borders are ethnic groups and they can move again. Because of historical hostilities, the Kuku and the Manda, they started struggling. So we are not oblivious to it. It is there in the presentation. But of course, for me personally, I do not want to pass judgments to this border to whom it belongs, it does not belong. Because for me, this is something that really has to belong to the what? To the border experts. There are lawyers who are dealing with this issue. There are surveyors. There are international maps and everything. But for us as academics, when we interfere in these issues, I think we should not also act and behave and write like people who try to present themselves as experts of everything, the colonial borders and how they moved, and then the whole legal aspects about it. No one single human being can really capture all of that. So, but we can continue blaming the colonialists. Now the colonialists left. Now we are the Africans. Do we solve our problem or just throw it back to the colonialists? I mean, if we go like that, we are not going to solve anything. The colonialists are not going to come and help. And some of us, by the way, who say that some of these issues were left vague by the colonialists so that we do exactly what we are doing now, having conflict against each other. Why is it that the Sudan-Ethiopia border since the colonial time? They tell, oh, we have the 1898 or something agreement between, between the imperial Ethiopian regime at that time and the British. And then I don't know how many ones that they have with Menelik and how many ones they have with Haile Selassie later on. The borders were zigzagging. And then why should the same problem exist in the borders of Tigray, of Ethiopia and Eritrea? Why should they exist in the borders between Djibouti and Eritrea? Why should they exist in Alami? Why should they exist in Abyei? Wherever you look at it, you find that the colonialists left things very vague, just half cooked and left. Now, of course, conspiracies, this is a way that some people say conspiracy theory. I don't even think about the conspiracy theory. Sometimes I think it is almost deliberate that we do not have peace with ourselves and our neighbors and enjoy the fruits of the resources in this area. And why are all of these areas are resource rich? None of these areas are poor. And they are major contributors, by the way, to the revenue of the government. Any one of these borders that I talked about, major contributor to the borders of government. And still government does nothing for the people. Our states have not fulfilled their part of the social contract. Our systems have done their part of the social contract. They pay their taxes. You think in any of these borders, you can go and sell your cattle and they don't get their 15 or 20% from you? Or your grain or anything you sell in this area, you get it. Even in the Dinga area, which I know, they are producing gold since the 1970s. I mean, there are people who call themselves the state. They are not the state. They are just state officials. They come and collect the gold from the people. I traveled in airplanes from Juba to Khartoum with people carrying tins full of gold. Since that time, the local people are as poor as the colonialists left them. So I can understand your argument. I can understand your anguish about the colonial legacy and all of that. But I think now the problem at our hand, and we should try to solve it. That's how I look at it. But we should not lose sight of the colonial legacy. I think you have got a point there. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor. I don't know if Amaneli is raising his hand to have additional question or view. If that is the case, go ahead, Amanel.
Yeah, this is a good thing. What I was thinking about is that in all the area that you have mentioned, be it in South Sudan, Ethiopia, Djibouti, in all other parts, what I see is our entry point have to be the colonial legacy. Whether we like it or not, we have to live with it. But the second step is that the states are the ones who are creating all these problems. As you have said clearly that they are not for the people. They are going there to collect their dues or tuition and other things. So what I see here is the first thing is to recognize the colonial boundary and work backward, because the people know each other very well and they have more in common that they fight among each other. So as peace builders or as a development experts who are here congregated, I think it will be good to work on this, that the people in the borders have to be empowered so that they can sort out their own problems, because they know exactly where their borders are, what are their problems. But when the state enters, is another thing. So that's what I wanted to raise in the first place. We have to recognize this, and these are our forefathers in 1963, 64, I don't remember exactly, that this is a curse of the colonial boundary, but we have to live with it. So we start with that, but let the people also, because if you see in the E3 triangle, like what you were saying, these people have a lot in common than they fight. Now the issue is the South Sudanese government, the Kenyan government, they found out that there is resource down there. It is not only oil, but it is water, aquiferous water down there. So when the resource comes, then the state enters and they create more problems. So this is where we as experts have to come and look at that these people have more in common than their problems. So we work on this so that peace and stability can be in all the different places that we have mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There was a hand, I don't know. Abdul Fattah Haban, please go ahead.
Thank you very much indeed. Just wanted to add one comment. As we can see, mostly in Africans, we are just making problems in our hands, right? We are just still talking about the issues of colonialism. We are still in a colonized in mind when we are just talking about the issue of colonialism and the legacies that the colonialism left in our continent. Yes, we agree as an Africanist to considering the boundaries that the colonial were demarcated to the continent, right? Then after that, we are accepted. We have to work our issues inside in Africa. Yes, the leaders are just creating the problems in the borders between two countries in order to just stay in the chair, and then they point in, there is the colonial problem. No, the issue is not the colonial problem. It is our leaders, and it is the way that Africans need to think it back, to sitting together, and then to solve these issues in the case in a base of in an African context, right? So by the time we just wanted to deal with the security issues, by the time we are focusing on economic issues, by the time we are focusing on human rights issues, we have to consider that all the things we can solve in our hands. But if you are just saying again and again the colonial, I think that we are not ready to solve our problems. So as an African people, we have to thinking about how we are solving our problems. Yes, we have to thinking about how our leaders just wanted to solve in these problems, and we have to, the citizens in Africa, they should have to lead in their leadership to solve their issues as an African people. But if we are talking about the issue in past history, we cannot change the past, but we are staying in present, and still our people are suffering security threat, human rights threat, economic threat, all that things. Are these things coming from the colonial? No, we are creating our hands. So we should have to stand in Africa as a one that's solving their problems without considering to talking about the issues in the past. Thank you very much indeed. That's what I wanted to comment. Yeah.
Thank you, Abd Fattah. I think we have only a couple of minutes. I don't know if Professor Mohammed Saleh has to say something. Otherwise, I would have to say a few words for conclusion.
I think go ahead, Reddy.
Well, let me thank the presenters for very rich presentations, and I think it was really insightful, except for the technical problems with Dr. Temasgen. So not only today, but also yesterday, we had very rich presentations also. So thanks to the presenters, thanks to all those who attended the both days conference. I would also like to thank the IPSS who have hosted the both panelists. Let me end by the positive tone, both by Professor Mohammed Saleh, but also what Dr. Moses said. We in the GHHF, as scholars and intellectuals, we shoulder the responsibility that is intellectual, professional, as well as moral, to deal with the central objective. Kidane, in his introduction of the objective of the forum, has mentioned, that is regional integration, peace and security, and socio-economic development. Now, one of the important points which was raised by Dr. Moses is that the role of external actors, whether it is international mainstream media, think tank, and scholars. We know that our history is written by others. The agenda is set by external actors. The narrative, the discourse is coming from outside. And most of the time, especially for the last 1.5 years, we have seen how international mass media, think tanks and scholars have been contributing to the division, hatred among the societies of the region. So we as scholars and intellectuals of the region, we have the moral, professional, and intellectual responsibility to counter those divisive, hatred inciting, we can call them campaigns, usually dictated by some kind of ideology. Personally, I feel everything goes in about Africa. It's laissez-faire. You say anything, and then there is no accountability. So that accountability has to come from us, the intellectuals and the scholars and professionals of the region. That is in that spirit that we have initiated this conference, but also we have a second part, which is going to be, I don't know, around May, April, probably Kidana will talk about that. But I think to emphasize again what Dr. Moses has said, we have the responsibility to write our history, to set our agenda, to find our own solutions, and that is up to us, not external forces, whatever the reason is. So with that, I think I will call upon Kidane if he has anything by way of conclusion.
Thanks, Reddy. Thanks for a very strong conclusion. Initially, we thought of 4 themes for this conference. The other 2 themes were external intervention in conflicts of the Horn of Africa. And the 4th one was conflicts and violence against women. We have not forgotten those 2 themes. So we will have, we will organize a follow-up conference, perhaps towards late April or maybe early May. And I would like to remind you that the forum is open for membership. So we hope you will join us. All you have to do to sign up is send me an email, kim3@psu.edu. And Laden already has put on chat her email address. So you can write either to Laden or me. We also want to invite you to suggest topics that you think are crucially important so that we consider them for our subsequent conferences. And we also are open to inviting you to present papers. So if you have important issues that you would like us to consider for the subsequent conferences and you would like to present papers, you are most welcome. Also, we will compile the papers from yesterday's and today's panels, and we will publish them. So if you present papers in the future also, you can count that we will publish them. Our aim is also to prepare policy papers. We haven't been very good at doing that, but hopefully we will start doing that as well. So thank you very much for attending the conference. I hope you found them useful, and please join us at the Greater Horn Horizon Forum, because it is a forum for all of us. It's open for all of us. And thank you very much again.
So thank you very much, and have a nice evening for those who are in the evening time, and nice day for all of you, or who are from the, I don't know, morning time zone. So I think we are closing. So stay well, everyone, and bye-bye.